Welcome to Beyond the Comic Book. I'm Ed, and since Loki Season 2 is around the corner, I wanted to give you guys a full recap of the series so far. But first, if you would please just take a second and subscribe to my channel, it will greatly help me be able to share more comic book content going forward. I really appreciate it in advance. The series begins with Loki being captured by the Avengers after the Battle of New York in Stark Tower. This is the part of the timeline that was not affected by the events of the Avengers Endgame. Later downstairs in the lobby, we see Ant-Man and Tony Stark during their travels in Endgame attempting to retrieve the Tesseract. Hulk then bursts through the staircase angry because they made him walk the stairs instead of using the elevator. He accidentally knocks Tony to the ground, causing him to drop the briefcase. Loki then sees an opportunity to escape using the Tesseract, but soon finds himself in a desert and quickly captured by Hunter B-15 of the Time Variance Authority, or the TVA. Transported to a mysterious place with lots of retro-looking technology, Loki quickly realizes that he is not as in control as he thinks he is. His powers don't work and his threats go ignored as he is being processed in what seems to be an old-fashioned police station. This is when we get our first glimpse of Miss Minutes, a seemingly artificially intelligent hologram who lets him know that he is about to stand trial for his crimes. She then gives him a brief history of the TVA, the sacred timeline, the timekeepers, variants, and the multiverse. He finally realizes how serious the TVA is when he witnessed a prisoner ahead of him being disintegrated, or what we now know as being called pruning. We then meet Mobius M. a TVA agent in the field investigating a series of murders committed by a time-hopping variant that they are trying to track down. He questions a young witness as the other agents recover the bodies of the dead TVA Minutemen. He tells the agents to prepare to reset the affected timeline when another agent appears through the portal, letting him know that they have finally captured the Loki variant. Loki then appears before Judge Renslayer and attempts to blame the Avengers for the deviation from the sacred timeline. Renslayer lets him know that what the Avengers did by traveling through time was supposed to happen, but his escape was not. He then attempts to escape the courtroom by using his powers, but is informed that they will not work in the TVA. Agent Mobius steps in and asks Renslayer to recruit Loki in order to capture the time-hopping variant that we now know is another Loki variant. Mobius takes Loki into a room where he is shown his past actions, such as his practical joke as the famous D.B. Cooper with the help of Thor and Heimdall. He is also shown events that were supposed to take place on his original timeline if he had not escaped using the Tesseract. When Mobius becomes distracted by B-15, Loki escapes, leading to a chase through the TVA's halls. During the chase, he enters a room where he threatens an agent named Casey to get him to help find the Tesseract so he can escape once more. He is amazed to find out that the Tesseract and other Infinity Stones are powerless in the TVA, and that there are multiple versions of each stored in a simple desk drawer and used as paperweights by agents. While he begins to question everything, he almost gets captured again, but inadvertently sends himself back to the timeline reviewing room where he restarts the hologram, seeing Odin's death, his budding relationship with Thor, and his death at the hands of Thanos. Now realizing that escape is hopeless, Loki concedes to Mobius and is informed that the murderous variant they are trying to capture is another version of himself. Episode 2 opens at a Renaissance fair in 1985 where TVA Minutemen are tracking down the mysterious Loki variant. The variant puts an enchantment on Agent C-20 and forces her to help fight the rest of the Minutemen. The variant then steals the timeline reset charges and escapes. In the next scene, we see Loki being quizzed by Miss Minutes on TVA protocols. Mobius enters and tells him that the variant Loki has committed another attack. They go into a briefing with Agent B-15 where they discuss the many Loki variants and their attributes. They then enter a time door and arrive at the 1985 Renaissance Fair. They examine the bodies and prepare to reset the timeline when Loki begins to delay them by claiming he knows what the variant is up to. He attempts to make a deal with Mobius before he will reveal the plan, but Mobius doesn't fall for it and orders the timeline to be reset. Back at the TVA in Renslayer's office, Mobius is given a warning about enlisting Loki, but she gives him the approval to move forward in the case anyway. She tells him that the mysterious timekeepers are very interested in the case and are watching closely. Loki is then given all of the case files and combs through them to get a fix on what the variant might be up to. He comes across a file pertaining to the destruction of Asgard during the Thor Ragnarok movie and notices that the file says there are no variations present. This helped Loki figure out that the variant was hiding in places where an apocalypse was going to take place, because any changes made to the timeline would be erased by the apocalypse itself. To test this theory, Loki and Mobius traveled to 79 Pompeii, Italy before the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Loki then creates a huge disturbance and Mobius sees that there is no variance detected. After a little more research, they determined that the variant must be hiding in 2050 Alabama, the site of a Category 8 hurricane that killed 10,835 people. Loki and a team of TVA agents arrive at a Roxcart superstore in Alabama 2050 during the massive storm. They all split up and Loki encounters the variant, who is using magic to enchant people to distract Loki while setting reset charges. They then engage in battle until we finally see that the variant Loki is actually a female version of Loki named Sylvie. Loki tries to convince her to team up with him, but she already has her own plans. All of the charges she planted around the store were attached to a TemPad to deliver the charges at different locations and cause a massive time variance so the timeline could split into a multiverse. Sylvie then escapes through a time door and Loki thinks about following her through, just as Mobius and the other agents run in with Agent C20, whom they found tied up in an office. They try to stop Loki, but it's too late. He runs through the time door and it closes behind him. Episode 3 opens with Sylvie and Agent C20 in a restaurant ordering a meal. They engage in friendly banter, then Sylvie asks C20 how many people are guarding the timekeepers. The question causes C20 to become confused for a moment. Sylvie then begins to play a game with her and repeats the question about the timekeepers. C20 once again becomes confused. The scene switches to reality and we then see that Sylvie is using her magic to enchant C20 to get the information about the TVA headquarters and the timekeepers. After she gets the information she wanted from C20, the scene advances to the present where Sylvie escapes to 2050 through a time door. We then see her exiting the time door inside the TVA. As she walks the halls looking for the timekeepers, she comes across agents and takes them down with ease, even though her magic is not working. She fights multiple agents and even prunes a few along the way. We then see Loki rushing through the time door before it closes, and he retrieves his knives from a locker where B-15 hid them in episode 2. Sylvie then arrives at a set of golden elevator doors that C20 told her about, defeating more agents as she approaches. Then Loki catches up with her and they begin fighting. Loki tries to reason with her, but she refuses, and they continue fighting until finally Renslayer arrives to capture them both. Loki grabs the TemPad from Sylvie and opens a time door below them, sending them to an inhabited moon called Lamentus 1 that is being bombarded by debris from an approaching planet that is about to collide with it. They soon find out that the TemPad is low on power and they're not able to open a time door to escape. So they run to find shelter and a power source to charge the TemPad when they come across an old lady who tells them that there is a train that could take them into town if they can get a ticket. They arrive at the train station only to find a long line and realize that they're going to have to wait. They also notice that the guards are only allowing the rich to board the train and not the poor. Loki then transforms himself into a guard and pretends that Sylvie is his prisoner that he is escorting. They board the train, sit at a table, and start to get to know each other, comparing notes on their past, relationships, and family. When Loki becomes drunk and draws attention to them, the guards show up, they fight, and eventually Loki gets thrown from the train and Sylvie realizes that she needs to join him because he has the TemPad. They then find out that the TemPad was destroyed during the fall from the train, leaving them trapped on the moon to die. They then come up with the plan to steal a spaceship called the Ark that is scheduled to leave the moon soon. On their way, they had to fight multiple guards and fight to get through the crowd, only to see the Ark destroyed right in front of them. Episode 4 starts with a flashback of Sylvie as a little girl on Asgard playing with toys. TVA agents led by Renslayer appear through a time door. They arrest young Sylvie, claiming that she committed crimes against the sacred timeline. They then arrive at the TVA to place Sylvie on trial. She breaks free from Renslayer and steals her TemPad. As she escapes, she turns and looks back at Renslayer with hate in her eyes, then disappears through the time door. Back on the dying moon Lamentus 1, Loki and Sylvie come to grips with the fact that they will probably die. Sylvie tells Loki the story of how the TVA destroyed her life because they didn't believe she should exist. Meanwhile, the TVA attempts to locate the two variants to finally prune them. Then B-15 starts to ask Mobius if he'd heard anything about C-20 and how she is doing after they rescued her. Mobius reluctantly says no, even though Renslayer told him last episode that C-20 died from the mind enchantment of Sylvie, but she asked him not to create a panic by telling anyone that she had died. As the planetary bombardment increases, Loki and Sylvie sit and watch the destruction all around them, waiting for the end to come. Loki tells her that she deserves to live and how great and wonderful she is because she survived the TVA as long as she did as a child. They start showing more and more strong feelings for each other as the destruction approaches. Their strong feelings for one another causes a variance spike on the sacred timeline that leads the TVA to their location, allowing the agents to both save them and to capture them. As Loki is being taken into a holding cell, he tries to explain that the TVA is lying about the agents of the TVA being created in the TVA. Mobius doesn't listen and throws him to a holding cell, which turns out to be a form of torture that forces the prisoner to relive bad memories. In Loki's case, it is a memory of him cutting Lady Sif's hair, causing her to hit, kick, and knee him over and over again. Loki begins to see the error of his ways, and with the help of Lady Sif, he realizes that he will always be alone if he doesn't change. Mobius then talks to Renslayer about possibly questioning Sylvie, but she refuses and sends him back to finish questioning Loki about the latest Timeline Nexus event. Mobius leaves her office and runs into B-15 in the hallway. They discuss how strange it is that they have dealt with Titans, Kree, and vampires, but they've never seen the TVA as bent out of shape as they are with the Loki variants. B-15 then asks Mobius if Loki said anything interesting, and he tells her about the TVA possibly lying to them. She then turns away with a suspicious look on her face. Mobius then releases Loki from his torture scenario with Lady Sif and asks him if he and Sylvie had been working together the whole time. Loki then lies and says that he is the mastermind behind the whole thing and that he plans to get rid of Sylvie once the plan is finished. Mobius then in turn also lies and says that he doesn't have to worry about her anymore because she was already pruned. This clearly shocks Loki, who is visibly shaken by the lie. Mobius then reveals his disgust and tells Loki how sick he is to fall in love with a version of himself. Loki begins to desperately inquire about Sylvie being dead or alive. Mobius tells him that she is for now. During the exchange, Loki tells Mobius that everyone in the TVA are variants, captured by the TVA and had their memories erased. Mobius calls him a liar and puts him back in the memory torture cell. We then see Hunter B-15 standing in the hallway thinking hard about something that is weighing heavily on her. She then enters the room where Sylvie is being held, opens a time door, and tells her to follow. Sylvie hesitates for a moment, then complies. Back in Renslayer's office, Mobius begins to question Renslayer about Loki, Sylvie, and Hunter C-20, but she continues to dodge the question and assures him that everything is under control. She also tells him that she is trying to protect him after the series of mistakes he made with the Loki variants and that the Timekeepers are going to personally oversee the pruning of them. Mobius then switches TemPads with Renslayer while she is distracted so that he can do a little investigating for himself. Hunter B-15 and Sylvie end up back in 2050 at the superstore. B-15 asks her about the vision that she had when Sylvie touched her hand. Sylvie lets her know that that wasn't a vision, but a memory of her past life. She goes on to say that the TVA stole her life and memories. She asks Sylvie to show her more, and she does. Hunter B-15 then turns to Sylvie and asks what happens next. Meanwhile, Mobius searches Renslayer's TemPad for new information and finds that Hunter C-20 was questioned by Renslayer and told her that she knew that she was a variant. Renslayer then stopped the recording and killed her so that the information would not get out. Mobius then releases Loki from the memory torture cell. They then solidify their new friendship and trust for one another, only to be caught by Renslayer while exiting the time door. They talk and argue back and forth while Renslayer contemplates what she's going to do about the situation, until finally she gives the order to prune Mobius. Loki watches in horror, and Renslayer tries to conceal the pain she feels for having to prune her friend. Loki is then led away to be judged by the Timekeepers along with Sylvie. They enter a chamber where the Timekeepers sit. The Timekeepers then ask both Loki variants if they had anything to say for themselves before they are pruned. Sylvie tells them that she thinks that they are afraid of the Loki variants, and that is why they want to have them pruned. The Timekeepers continue to threaten them when Hunter B-15 enters the chamber, frees Loki and Sylvie, and a big fight breaks out. As this goes on, the Timekeepers just sit there and watch until Loki and Sylvie defeat all of the guards. The Timekeepers then try to make a deal with Sylvie, but she refuses and throws her sword at one of them, severing the head. We then find out that the Timekeepers are nothing but robots, as the remaining two let out an eerie laugh before shutting down. Frustrated by the turn of events, Sylvie wonders out loud who the creator of the TVA is, since the Timekeepers are fake. Loki then begins to comfort her as her frustration grows and tries to tell her his true feelings. But before he can finish what he is saying, Renslayer sneaks up behind them and prunes Loki. Sylvie then knocks Renslayer to the ground and demands that she tell her everything she knows about the TVA and the variants. Episode 5 opens with Loki waking up after being pruned by Renslayer. He finds himself in a desolate realm called the Void, surrounded by several other Loki variants, each with unique personalities and appearances. These Lokis include Classic Loki, Kid Loki, Alligator Loki, and Boastful Loki. After they help Loki up, they encounter a massive cloud-like creature called Goliath, which guards the Void and devours anything that comes into its path. They all begin running to find a place to hide. Back at the TVA, Sylvie continues to question Renslayer about everything going on with the Timekeepers and who else might be in charge of the TVA. She gets a little information from Renslayer about Loki, the Void, and the end of time. Renslayer then allows Sylvie to use her TemPad to help her find and get Loki back. With the help of Miss Minutes, Renslayer searches through the virtual files pertaining to the start of the TVA and the end of time. But Sylvie starts to feel that they are stalling for some reason. That's when the TVA agents burst through the door. Sylvie hides behind the judge's bench, and when she sees no other way out, she prunes herself, hoping that Renslayer was telling the truth about Loki being alive. In the Void, the Lokis then arrive at their base of operations, and each of them tell the stories of their Nexus events that caused the TVA to hunt them down. Then Loki realizes that all of his variants seem to have given up, and he tells them that they are all the same except Sylvie. He explains that her plan is not to take over the TVA like the others would, but she wants to take the TVA down. Loki then asks the other variants to help him kill Goliath and join Sylvie. They all begin to look at one another and burst into laughter. Loki then decides to leave them to their passive existence, but as he opens the door to leave, he finds himself surrounded by an even larger group of Loki variants. During a brief discussion, the original group of Lokis find out that Boastful Loki betrayed them. Then all of the Lokis begin to betray one another for the throne, and they all start fighting amongst themselves. At that time, Loki, Classic Loki, Kid Loki, and Alligator Loki escape the chaos and start looking for Goliath. Meanwhile, Sylvie wakes up in the Void with Goliath lurking nearby. She begins to run while dodging its attacks. As she runs, a pizza delivery car approaches at high speed. It comes to a stop, the back door opens, and Sylvie jumps in, only to find out that Mobius is driving. They speed off to escape Goliath, only to have Sylvie decide that the monster might be the key to finding out who is behind the TVA. Mobius turns the car around and heads towards the monster as it attacks a Navy ship that just materialized in the Void. The other 4 Lokis watch as Goliath destroys the ship and decide to think a little bit more about their plan of attack after seeing the destruction it causes. Then Sylvie and Mobius arrive to meet the Lokis. Sylvie listens to the plan and tells them how stupid it is and that it won't work. Loki then asks her what her plan would be. She tells them that she believes she can enchant the monster and have it lead them to the entrance to the end of time because she believes it's guarding the way. Back at the TVA, Renslayer confronts Hunter B-15 about what she thinks Sylvie's motivations are. B-15 then asks her why she's still protecting the TVA after finding out the Timekeepers are faked. She says that the TVA needs to be stable and that she plans to provide the stability. B-15 then realizes that Renslayer is trying to find the creator of the TVA for herself, but believes that Sylvie will find and kill them first. Renslayer then asks Miss Minutes to find every bit of information she can find on the creation of the TVA as soon as possible because whoever started it is in danger. Then Loki and Sylvie share a special moment together. They both are uncomfortable because they struggle in relationships and don't know how to navigate them. They discuss their trust for one another and what they think their futures will be like when all of this is over. Soon, they meet the other Lokis and Mobius on the hillside where they watch Goliath and come up with a plan. Sylvie and Loki decide that they will attempt to force the monster to take them to the doorway to the end of time so that they can find the person responsible for the TVA. Mobius invites Classic Loki, Kid Loki, and Alligator Loki to the TVA to help him finish taking them down. However, they decide that they want to stay in the void because they've become so accustomed to it. Loki and Sylvie walk towards Goliath as it takes notice of them. They decide that facing it head on is not a good idea and that they need a distraction. Loki decides to be the distraction that Sylvie needs to be able to enchant the beast. It works for a moment, but Goliath turns his attention back on Sylvie. Loki rushes back to Sylvie to try to distract the monster once again. Just as Goliath prepares to consume them both, Classic Loki returns and conjures a massive replica of Asgard to get Goliath's attention. And it worked. As Goliath lunges at the massive structure, Sylvie grabs Loki's hand and assures him that he can help her enchant the monster. They both grab an extension of Goliath and begin to touch his mind to get him to do what they want him to do. At the same time, Goliath continues to attempt to destroy the fake structure until Classic Loki grows too weak to maintain the facade. His illusion fails and Goliath turns his attention to him and devours him just as Loki and Sylvie gain control of him and reveals the opening to the end of time, just as they planned. They begin to walk towards the opening just as a large castle at the center appears. If you made it this far in the video and like my content, please subscribe and hit the like button. It would definitely help out the channel. Now here's the last episode. Episode 6 begins with sounds from the MCU and historical events throughout time as the camera travels through the sacred timeline, giving us a sense of timelessness and the endless loop of time. We then see Loki and Sylvie standing at the front door of the large castle as Sylvie attempts to gather her thoughts before they enter. However, someone opens the door before she can do so. As they slowly enter the castle, not sure of what they will encounter, suddenly Miss Minutes appears in front of them, causing them to draw their weapons. Miss Minutes congratulates them on reaching what she calls the Citadel at the end of time and identifies its owner as He Who Remains. She lets them know that he is impressed with them and wants to make a deal with them. She says that He Who Remains will insert them both back into the current timeline in a way that won't disrupt the TVA and its mission to maintain a single timeline. She goes on to say that they will reign together in Asgard with the Infinity Gauntlet as their possession. For just a moment, they both seem to be tempted by the offer, but ultimately turn it down. Miss Minutes, concerned by their decision, disappears and then they move forward. Immediately, Miss Minutes returns to the TVA to give Renslayer some files. Renslayer tells her that those were not the files she requested. Miss Minutes then tells her that he thought that the files would be more useful. Renslayer asks who he is, and Miss Minutes just disappears without answering. Loki and Sylvie ventures deeper into the Citadel, carefully watching their surroundings when an elevator door opens in front of them with a man who we now know as He Who Remains sitting inside. They stand back ready to fight as he tells them how impressive they both are. He invites them into the elevator and they accept the invitation. They stand behind him as they comment on the fact that he is just a man. He confirms the fact that he is just a man as Sylvie swings her sword to kill him, but he instantly relocates behind them. He laughs as they turn to look at him and he relocates again behind Sylvie. Sylvie strikes at him once more, but this time he completely disappears. The elevator comes to a stop, the doors open, and they find He Who Remains standing on the other side waiting for them. He invites them to sit down and have a drink with him. Back at the TVA, Mobius confronts Renslayer and tells her that he and the other TVA agents know her secrets. Then the scene cuts to Hunter B-15 and other TVA agents in Ohio in 2018 at a high school. The agents follow B-15 into a classroom where she tells them to wait for a moment. At that time, a variant of Renslayer walks in and confuses all of the agents as to what is happening. At the Citadel, He Who Remains tries to convince Loki and Sylvie that he knows everything that happens up to the end of time, and that is how he is able to avoid being killed by them. He also tells them about experiences they had together when no one else was around. He goes on to explain that his very own variants used to cooperate throughout the multiverse, sharing knowledge and technology until one variant ruined all hope of peace between them, causing a deadly multiverse war to break out, nearly destroying all existence. The beast Goliath was created in all of that destruction, but He Who Remains studied it and brought it to submission. He used it to help maintain his own single timeline, the sacred timeline, and created the TVA to police it. He goes on to say that now he is tired and much older, and he is looking for someone to replace him. He proposes that Loki and Sylvie together can replace him, or they could just kill him and unleash chaos, allowing infinite multiverse branches to form. At that time, he enters a period of time that he has never experienced before. The moment when Loki and Sylvie makes their decision. He becomes frightened by the uncertainty and lets them know that it is all up to them now. He removes his TemPad and becomes truly vulnerable. Sylvie leaps up to kill him, but Loki stops her. He tries to reason with her about the possibility of an infinite number of conquerors starting a multiversal war. Sylvie refuses and attacks Loki. Loki fights back to prevent her from killing He Who Remains. Loki asks her to wait just a little while to see what happens. He also tells her that he doesn't want the throne or power. He just wants her to be okay. They look into each other's eyes. Sylvie drops her sword and kisses Loki. Then she opens a time door using He Who Remains TemPad, pushes Loki through it and closes it. She picks up her sword again, walks towards him, moving the furniture in the process, and lunges the sword into his chest. They look at each other in the eyes, and he says to her, "See you soon," then dies in his chair. Almost immediately, the timeline branches multiply many times over until the sacred timeline is lost in the branches. Back at the TVA, Mobius and Hunter B-15 stare at the timeline monitor as it crosses the point of no return. Loki sits alone thinking about what they've done. He then gets up and tries to find Mobius. After searching for a while, he walks in while Mobius and Hunter B-15 are discussing next steps that they need to take. Loki explains everything that happened at the Citadel and how they unleashed multiple versions of a very evil man into the multiverse. He quickly finds out that Mobius and Hunter B-15 don't remember him at all. He slowly turns and looks into the distance, realizing that everything has changed. Then we see that the statues of the timekeepers that used to sit at the center of the TVA have changed into a singular statue of Kang the Conqueror, the very evil variant that He Who Remains warned was coming. I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe, leave a like on this video, and also leave a comment on your favorite parts of the Loki series. Thanks again for watching.